Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Bowlers Union podcast. We have a really special guest for you today. We have South African legend and icon, Shaun Pollock. How are you doing, Shaun? Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, all good, guys. Good to be here. Catching up with two other Warwickshire boys. This should be fun.
Just start you off like we do every guest. It's just a quick 5 questions, and we'll start you off with picking. If you
How
had
much
to choose one,
how much thought do I have to give to these? It's just quick fire, just whatever comes to mind. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
seam or swing,
What is that?
seam or swing,
I'm going seam.
pace or bounce,
Pace.
back of the hand slower ball or knuckle ball,
Knuckle.
nick off or bowled,
Clean bowled.
good bouncer or good Yorker.
Yeah, bouncers have got the intimidation, but there's nothing like a good Yorker that gets through.
That's amazing. We had Mr. Dale Steyn on yesterday, and he was more about bouncers. He said he felt anyone spinners can bowl Yorkers, but the fear of a bouncer around your head was really intimidating. He felt so he chose bouncer.
Well, that's probably he bowled at about 150. I was just about 130, so maybe the reason why.
Can you explain reason why you chose seam over swing?
Well, just sometimes sometimes swing on certain surfaces, it can be predictable, and you can kind of spot it early. Seam is so late, the movement, particularly if it's off the right length, and there's basically nothing you can do. Whereas swing out the hand, you can kind of deal with. I mean, it looks sexy, but I think the seam movement is more effective.
And you opt for pace over bounce, was it?
Yeah, I just think genuine pace. When I'm talking genuine pace, like, I mean, if it's a difference of 130, 135, then I'm asking you for bounce. But if it's over 150, those are so rare. It's a bit of an endangered species around the world. So if you can do that, that's the one that gives you fear factor. I mean, whether it's pitched up or short or whatever it is, if it's coming a bit quicker than everything else you faced in your life, it gives you the sleepless night. That's why the pace.
And then just the one which I enjoy finding out is nick off or bold. You chose bold. What
yeah, probably most of my percentages would probably be more nick off over my career, but there's nothing better when it's timber. And then also you can get a little nick off, and it's not guaranteed it's going to be taken. Whereas if you knock over timber, it's game over.
No, good answers. Good answers.
To be fair, you played your slip cord and would have been pretty good, wouldn't it? You'd have had what, Callis, Smith in there. They're not dropping too many.
Even in the early days, we had Brian McMillan. He was probably the best. I mean, he had these massive bucket hands. He was a Warwickshire boy. He spent a bit of time, so did Dale Steyn. And he was just brilliant. I was also fortunate when I played provincial cricket to have Neil Johnson in my slip cord, and the guy obviously played for Zimbabwe, but he played locally for Natal, and really good. So most of the time we were in with the chance if you found the edge. And we also always used to have wonderful backward points for South Africa and Natal wherever I played. Even for Warwickshire, Trevor Penny was my backward point when I played this. So if you're going to make a mistake, it was kind of short and wide, and then you always had a chance that someone would stop it.
Absolutely, yeah. There's not too many reasons to pitch it up when you've got him at backward point for sure. Yeah, I remember. To be fair, I remember watching. Back in the heyday, like more Jonty Rhodes, I suppose, for South Africa. But Penny was lively, wasn't he? But was he Zimbabwean or was he South African?
Yeah, he was Zimbabwean. He used to sit next to me in the dressing room. Jonty was more of a stopper, to be brutally honest. He was unbelievable at covering ground and launching his body and cutting balls off. I think Trev was probably more along the lines of like a punting kind of field, that you pick it up and hit the stumps, and you really had to be wary about where he was and keep an eye on him, whether he was behind square or in front of square. So he was more of a quick over the ground, wonderful pick up and hit the stumps, whereas Jonty was box office from a stopping perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I've got a question for you, actually. I did a bit of digging on Crick Info at some of your records, and obviously Keith and I, being bowlers, not at your level, but we enjoyed this one, is you have bowled the 5th most balls in ODI cricket. of all time.
Yeah, it's a long service mode, isn't
it? yeah, it's a great effort. And we were wondering if you'd be able to guess who. There's 2 seamers that have bowled more. That's it. Who you might guess they were.
I'm trying to think of guys who've got more wickets. Shaun Pollock, would he be one?
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
He'd be one. And then it'll probably be either Waka or Wazim.
Yeah, to be fair, yeah, spot on. Yeah, Wazim Akram. So you got Wazim Akram, Chaminda Vaas, and yourself have bowled, an obscene amount of deliveries.
I mean, that was a shorter format for us for some. I mean, the T20 only came in at the back end. I think our last 3 or 4 years, we maybe had some T20 internationals that we played. So we used to love the white ball stuff. As an bowler, it was exhilarating. In those days too, you dictated terms. You could dominate games. You could win games. It wasn't about just trying to prevent the damage that was being done to you. So I thoroughly enjoyed my one-day international cricket. I think at one stage I would have played like 120 or 130 consecutive matches without missing one. So I didn't like to rest either. They would come and say, okay, test series coming up. Let's maybe give you a bit of a break. I was like, I'll enjoy my white ball stuff. I'm keen to play. Crowds were always in. Atmosphere was always good. So I just love to keep going.
Did you, oh, sorry, Keith, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, just from a bowling point of view, you were obviously very, very quick. Was that something you always had when you were younger, or is it something you worked on when you were younger to get better at?
Yeah, I think growing up, I was little. I basically only grew in my last year of school. I had these big feet from an early age. I was like size 11 and this little short body. And for me at those days, it was all about consistency. I just didn't want to go for runs. I wanted to hit good areas. I think that was kind of what my dad ingrained into me, but I hated going for boundaries. I felt like I was letting the team down. So it was all about a disciplined line of length. And then in my matric year, when I got bigger, I actually played in a hockey provincial RPT and broke my arm, which maybe gave me a bit more of a floppy wrist. But I spent like 6 weeks going home after school and I couldn't do anything. So I ended up just sleeping. And that was the time that I really grew. And then the mindset kind of changed at the end of my schooling career, where I was kind of running in and causing a bit of trouble with a little bit more pace. At the end of the school year, I made SA schools. And then soon after that, I ended up playing for Natal. And I started to become a little bit more of a tearaway. Technically, I wasn't great. There's a few little wrist positions that weren't that great. I was kind of rolling down the side of it, causing it to come out like a bit of a leg cutter. And then we were fortunate to have Malcolm Marshall as a mentor at Natal for my time. So he came, I think, in 92, and that was when I started playing for Natal. And he was just great. I mean, he helped me technically, helped me mentally, just to believe and kind of what to think of when I was bowling. You have to respect the opposition, but don't give them too much respect and believe that you can knock them over. And just that kind of mindset. And, listen, and he also came from the school of no drives, and that if you wanted to drive, give him a car kind of thing. But yeah, and then it was a case of getting the wrist more behind it, doing a little bit of gym. I was a bit wiry when I was young, but tried to bulk up a touch and just get a little bit more strength. And then it kind of had the catalyst effect on going. I kind of made a name for myself. We played on nice wickets too. That was the one thing about Malcolm. He was coming to the back end of his career, so he wasn't looking for any flat wickets. Were a couple of green ones that we played on, and that suited me down to the T. So we just ran up with Lance Klusener, was playing Neil Johnson, Ross Feenstra at the time, and Mako. And I just charged in, and I could bang it in back over length as hard as I want, hit the deck, and it was like kind of pinging through. And I hit a few people on the head, and that was kind of how I started to get a bit of a reputation for doing that, and it made people take notice. But it only really stuck around for maybe until 96, 97. My first series against England, I kind of charged in. But then unfortunately I had an ankle injury and a posterior impingement, which I think 90% of the bowlers here in South Africa end up having with our hard surfaces and the effort and the force you put through that ankle. And I was never quite as quick after that, maybe another season or two. But then I kind of settled into a fast medium, hit the area, and try and be consistent and do a job that way.
What did you enjoy more? Did you enjoy having that extra yard more, or did you enjoy the sort of new feeling of control that you gained?
Yeah, I mean, I still had quite a good control, you know, especially in the one-day cricket. I didn't really go for much as trying to generate. I think it's quite taxing on the body. You know, people have this expectation as well when you're a quick bowler, is that every time you're going to get the ball, you're going to charge in and bowl at that particular speed. So it's a hard thing to keep coming back for second, third, fourth spells and keep picking up or hovering around the right kind of pace. That's why Dale Steyn and Alan Donald were so brilliant for us at what they managed to do, even Mackay and Tini, consistently being able to hit those high numbers. So, you know, I think it probably suited my personality more to be a bit of a line and length, boring kind of individual who kind of stuck to that game plan. But yeah, I mean, you still had that little effort ball up the sleeve, which you could slide in it every once in a while. And my bouncer, even when I got a little bit slow, was still quite effective because it was one of those ones that kind of nipped back and followed the batter rather than going away and lying to leave it comfortably. So I tried to use it as best I could. But I think just for longevity, I realized that the body wasn't going to hold out if I carried on charging it as best I could. So it was probably a case of a wise decision, and also an understanding that being a big out and out quick was going to be difficult for 10 years.
Yeah, well, yeah, for 15,000 balls or whatever it is in just one format, that would have been a good effort. I remember, or because I've been looking at a few videos, obviously prior to you coming on, you bowling. This would have been, I think, in maybe your first series against England. Yeah, some rapid bouncers, like you say, that nip back. Was it Robin Smith maybe, or someone like that you hit in the head in that series?
Yeah, Robin Smith, I hit a few times. Mark Atherton, I hit a few times. If I'd known I was going to work with him in the commentary box, I might have tried to hit him a few more times. But yeah, I used to get close to the stumps, and you know, batters always used to talk about you kind of hit that area, and then they think they can sway to get out the way, but because it nicked back, we kind of get them into trouble. So yeah, I mean, even when I went to Warwickshire for the first year, I wasn't really into it, but the boys were kind of excited. They used to get the old Wisden, and then anyone who hit on the head, they would cut out the picture of that guy out of the Wisden from the year before and stick it up on the wall. I think when we got to 10, I said, "Come on, guys! I don't think this is this is the aim of what I'm trying to do here." And they kind of put it to rest. So yeah, it was something that was part of my artillery. And as I say, I think, you know, I suppose in your career, you need something. You need like a bit of a catalyst or something that brings attention to what you're doing. And I think that was kind of what I was doing. There was a lot of talking when I was playing for Natal of me hitting guys on the head and making life a little bit uncomfortable for them. And then I came into the international setup and then a little bit on the county setup. And that kind of makes you get known and maybe creates a little bit of a fear factor. And then you can follow up with all the other kind of stuff. But I think everyone kind of needs something where you burst onto the scene and they go, "Oh, what's this guy about? Oh, he's got this, he's got that." And they kind of take notice.
I'd seen earlier, well, we've both seen earlier online that you'd said you believe massively in basics at an early age for bowlers. What can you specify what those basics were?
Yeah, I think, I mean, even myself, you know, as I said, I worked a lot with Malcolm. So when I got to that stage of being 20 years old, 19, 20 years old, there was kind of little things that I had to get out of doing, which had been part and parcel of what I've done as a kid growing up. And in saying that, there were just little minor technical changes that I had to make. I was very fortunate to have my dad, who had obviously played for South Africa, and he gave me the basics of try and get your hand as high as you can, bowl from the highest point, kind of look into what position, and you know, just little basics that allows you to have a good foundation and then be able to go from there. And it makes it so easy because, you know, if you talk about languages, if you try and teach a kid who's 5 or 6 a language, they pick it up like that. Whereas if they don't understand the language and you try and teach them at 21, 22, it's really difficult for them to grasp the concept of it. So when they start playing, if you can get them on the right track, give them the basics, give them sound foundation, then they just allow the actual ability and skill to take over. And there's not too much technical work that you have to do. Yeah, you probably tinker as you go along. But if the basics are there, then they've really got the best chance. And I think the more I go around and the more you see some of the coaching that goes on, you know, sometimes you'll have kids and you say, well, you know, they come for coaching. What have you been doing? Oh, I spent 3 years in an academy. And you go, gosh, and they didn't change that and they didn't change that. They just let you go on with it. It's like, okay, well, maybe that academy needs to have a relook at its kind of structure and what it's kind of trying to do. So I just think that's why I'm such a believer. And, without me knowing it, as I said, I was fortunate that my dad was around, and he could just say, hey, bit of less of this, bit of more of that. And that really, really helped. And once I'd kind of, ingrained it into my system, it was kind of easy after that.
Yeah, I've got a 5-year-old boy, and technically I'm quite focused on his technique. So already I'm drilling into him. He has no idea what's coming for him, unfortunately. But yeah, I believe in the same values as you there.
Yeah, I think the thing too, as you go along, you realize, I mean, there was certain things that I kind of did. I mean, Malcolm made me do a lot of wrist exercises, and you kind of lie on the bed and just kind of fling the ball up and down to make sure it's coming out of your hand nicely. And even on tour, when you're bored in the room, you take one of the new ones and just keep rolling it out to get that sensation. But even like there was one kid who was struggling with a bit of a bent elbow. He had a bit of a throw on him, and I was thinking to myself, well, how are we going to get him out of this? And we were at a friend's house, and he's got a tennis court, an AstroTurf tennis court, and that's where he was showing me his action. His dad said, "Oh, why don't you have a look?" And I was like, "Oops, I don't want to tell the dad, but there's a bit of a kink in that elbow." And I was thinking, okay, what can I give him in order to make sure that he eliminates that kink? And I looked around, and there was a volleyball that they had been using to play over the tennis net. And I said, okay, well, bring that here, bowl that, because you can't throw a volleyball. And, it's so big that you kind of just balance it on your hand. So you got to keep it nice and straight. And we did that for he probably did about 20 of those. And then I said, okay, now keep it in that position and try and bowl. And sure as nuts, it looked a lot better. He obviously had to do a lot more of it as he went on. But it's just little pearls of wisdom that if you give a young kid at some stage, or give them a good grounding, or iron out a kink in their armory, you can have a massive impact on what happens later on down the line.
Yeah. You just mentioned about Malcolm Marshall and working with you on your wrist. Do you and he believe in having a fixed wrist, or would you have a bit of whip to it? Because there's a few different theories, isn't there?
Yeah, I think what we always try to work on is trying to have a fixed. Let me try and get this into a picture here. You're trying to have a fixed wrist from a perspective of not doing that. So that's kind of locked into that position, but you want it to be floppy as you possibly can to be able to do that. So we always used to talk about the double click. Obviously, you've got a mouse and you do the double click to get into certain things. So you kind of want that double click of a flick, but you don't want to lose that art of keeping that in the right position. You don't want it to go here and here. So you kind of lock it in there, but have it loose to be able to do that. So that for me was the key to my wrist position, and something I had to work on.
Yeah. Because we have to talk to all our guests, I suppose, about this, because it's so on trend, I suppose, in the bowling world. But is the wobble seam versus a perfect seam? Where do you sit on that camp? Do you think wobble seam's been bowled for generations but just not been talked about it, or do you actually think it is a kind of modern thing?
Well, I think it's more of a modern thing as whereas the guys are trying to do it. For myself, mine actually used to come out with a bit of a wobble. I wasn't the best. Jock Callis, Alan Dawson, Dale Steyn, Malcolm, they were brilliant. I mean, I used to watch this bolt upright seam. And mine, because it came out of my fingers, I would have certain days like the Duke, I felt like I could get to come out peachy because, it was just one of those balls that sits beautifully on the axis. But I used to often have issues with trying to get the kookaburra into the right position. And a lot of it would come out wobbly, but it wasn't something that I fought. Because when you go to England for the first time and you start to swing the ball, you think, oh, how brilliant is this? But then it actually becomes difficult to pick up wickets because you kind of end up getting too much kind of movement. So the lack of movement was just like a late seam movement, as I touched on a little bit earlier, is kind of more effective. And that's why I understand. I mean, Jimmy Anderson, for example, I mean, he's brilliant at, he can go either way, in out swinger, and just present that seam in pristine condition. But the wobble means, okay, it goes down and now the batter has to kind of guess what it's going to do. Whereas out of the hand, if it's presented beautifully, you can kind of work it out. I mean, the batters are so good that they, after a meter or two, they kind of worked out what's come out of the hand and what it's probably going to end up doing. So I know Stuart Broad at one stage in one of his interviews said he had watched a few of my videos and seen that I came out with a wobble seam and was something that he tried to work on. But in all honesty, mine wasn't always a case of me wanting to do it. It was just a bit of a default setting that out of my hand, it didn't always come out as good as, for example, Jacques Kellis. I mean, he was wonderful at presenting the seam in our side.
So were you trying to take the ball towards the slips for your stop ball? If from memory, I feel like that's
yeah. When I burst on, or early on in my career, I was a bit of an in swing kind of bowler, and that's when Malcolm kind of said to me, "Listen, your wrist is not as much behind it, and it's coming out as a leg cutter." And then when I started to work on my wrist, I kind of ended up getting the ball to just tail away. And it's funny, if you go around the world, it's like in South Africa and in England, for example, you start to get a little bit of shape through the air, and then because of the nature of the surfaces, that them being green, lots of grass in it, as it kind of pitches, it carries on that way, and it looks like it's a proper way swinger. You bowl exactly the same delivery on an abrasive surface in the subcontinent, and what happens, it comes out with a nice position, and then as it pitches, because it grips and it's dry, it kind of rolls. So it doesn't carry on in that movement. So you think, well, he's not really shaping it. So I used to spend a lot of time on my own. I didn't like to bowl that much to other batters in the end, in the nets at the end of my career, because I wanted to kind of see what it did after it had gone past the stumps, just to kind of take the noise out of the system of the guy trying to bash you into the nets. And so I wasn't a massive swinger. I would have certain days where, you just comes out really good, and conditions, maybe the humidity and, the atmospheric conditions as they are, the ball's swinging nicely. But in general, I just kind of had a little bit of movement, and then in South Africa and England, it would just pitch and keep going on its way, and that would kind of cause the trouble. But I can remember when you look back at your career and you think, when you started, like I started in 95, gee, what did I really know? You kind of think you've got skills, but by the end of the career, when you look back and think, gosh, that little 22-year-old, when he burst on, he knew nothing compared to what you end up knowing by the end of your career. And there was one series in particular where everything kind of turned around for me. So, as I said, I'd grown up playing here in Natal, green wickets. We banged it in as short as possible, charged in, and it was kind of balls coming through here that were creating most of the problems from my kind of deliveries. And then you get picked to play for South Africa. Your first series is in South Africa, so that's no problem. You stick with that same kind of game plan. But I think my first tour that I went to the subcontinent in 97 was to Pakistan. And I was running and trying to bowl as quick as I could. And I was hitting kind of 7 meters back of a length. And it was going to just take him forever to get to them. They were sitting on the back foot and dealing with it comfortably. And Bob kind of had a chat with me. He said, Polly, you've got to, Bob Wilmer, that is, you've got to learn to be getting it fuller and doing a little bit more with it closer to the bat. And when you hear that as a kid, you kind of take it as you don't always take it all that well. You kind of take it as though it's a bit harsh, I feel like I've gone right at the start of my career, but I knew I had to develop, and I kind of started to try and do a few things in that. So I went a little bit more round arm. I tried to get my wrist like really cupped into a position to try and shape it away. I spent hours just on my own working on trying to bowl the way swinger, bowl the fuller length. And we were, I think it was 1-0 in the series. And I think we put 130 or 140 on the board for Pakistan to win the test match and the series. That was all we had to defend. And it was just that day, and at the warm-up, it kind of all came together, where I felt like I was getting a bit more round on, I was getting a little bit more shape. And I thought, okay, well, maybe today's the day. And it just came out absolutely sweet. I got it fuller, I got it moving closer to the batter. And I picked up 4 of the first 5 wickets to 4. We had them like 40 for 5. And it was that little reference point which was huge for me. I mean, people look back and say, oh, good performance. But actually, it was massive, because mentally, it was something that I thought I had to change, something I worked on technically. And then it came good at that stage, and I managed to help us win the game. So from that moment on, it really helped, and it really changed my mindset. Even my first tour of England was a case in point where I started to feel sorry for myself after the first test, going past the outside edge. And Bob said, Polly, here, you've got to be even fuller than we talked about in Pakistan. I was like, oh, Bob, really? Not much positiveness coming from you at this stage. But the second test and the third test, I kind of worked it out. And you don't start feeling sorry for yourself. You realize if I'm beating the bat, I'm too short. And until I change that, you're going to continue to have no success. So it is a learning process. And then by the end of your career, you really do have a good understanding about what's required.
Yeah, you just end up wishing you were 10, 15 years younger again.
Yeah, could I not? What if I knew what I know now or then?
Yeah.
It was a big plus.
We interviewed Dale Steyn yesterday and or the day before, and he mentioned about how you were mentally levels above anyone else. How did you get yourself into that mindset where you were able to just separate yourself from everyone else in how you went about things?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say I was a loner, but I was a kind of guy who kind of had a clear understanding about what I wanted to do. And also, it was a case of like, if you had a good game and you went back to the hotel room, it wasn't like, oh, I got 5 for, yeah, well done. It was kind of, well, that's what I should be doing. That's the way I should be performing. So it was kind of, that was the expectation. And I think also mentally, I got into an understanding that hitting good areas in that time or that era of playing cricket and being as consistent as you could in that fashion allowed you to be effective. I mean, I couldn't have had the same game plan if I was born and raised in India or Pakistan. I would have had to be very different. But the conditions in South Africa were perfect for a guy bowled 135, maybe 140 at times, and hit a really good area, got the ball through to the keeper, and was consistent and giving you nothing to get away. And I think that was one of my mental things about trying to every day come out there and be consistent. And that also allowed me to go between test matches and one days because it was the same simple kind of game plan. If you just hit that consistent length, you could be effective in both formats. And there wasn't guys ramping you over the keeper or playing some of these extravagant shots that were kind of looking to score in orthodox ways. So my simple game plan kind of worked. And mentally, I was probably tough enough to just say I'm going to stick to that on most occasions.
So I haven't been able to find it, and it's really, really frustrated me. But you did a masterclass for Sky TV in the UK. I don't know if you can remember it. It was about 20 minutes. And you've just said something there that reminded me of it because I'm trying to get my son to watch it, and it's literally the perfect summary of bowling in 20 minutes as far as I'm concerned. But you mentioned about training on your own and just bowling through and kind of watching the ball. Would that have been your go-to training method toward the end of your career, or one that you'd recommend to people?
Well, what we did when I was growing up, there was Eddie Barlow. He came up with a channel where you go and put 2 pieces of wood down on about 5.5, 6 meters just outside the off stump, and you'd end up bowling 4 overs and seeing how many times you could land it through there. And that was a lot part of our sort of pre-season build-up. And being the competitive person that I am, I kind of wanted to win it when I was playing for Natal. So you would try and get as consistent as you could. I think the best we got was like 20 out of 24. And that was when you started to get that good at doing it. The coaches became very strict about whether it did pitch in the right area or not. So you had like a meter to work with. And I think it just gives you confidence. It's like golfers or tennis players or whatever. The more you repeat something, the more you have the belief that you can do it. And there's always invariably pressure times, whether it be in one days or test matches, whatever it may be, that you're going to be put under the pump. You're not going to be on top. You're going to be feeling the pressure. And if you can just go back to your default setting of, without thinking about it too much, be able to hit that area outside the off stump and get it through to the keeper, it makes life easier for you. It just gives you an out kind of thing where if you stick to that, you can still do a job. Even if you aren't picking up wickets, you can look to be effective. So I think it was something that I was quite fixated on really as a young part of my career. And then I used to get a string and put it down around the stumps and kind of make a channel and then work on making sure I could pitch it on and hit the stumps for left-handers or pitch it close to the off stump and take it away for right-handers and do different deliveries. But it was just kind of, I needed a visual to kind of work on and aim at. And those would, I like to go on my own and do that because, as I said, also you get a nice ball, for example, and it's going to swing, and after 3 or 4 deliveries, some oak and the net carves it into a piece of wood or concrete on the side, and it comes back and it's now got a ding in it, and now it's not swinging. So it was nice just to go and just be in my own little space and work on what I wanted to do.
It's frustrating, to be fair, isn't it? If you're bowling into a net and the ball instantly hits the net after it passes the stumps, and you just don't get that nice feedback and of how is it coming out and all that sort of stuff.
Actually, at the end of my career, there was a fitness trainer, Adrian LaRue, who used to come out to the middle with me, and I'd get him to stand in the batter position, and then I put myself under pressure because he had no bat, no pads, nothing. He was just with his shorts and of his t-shirt on, and obviously his trainers, and he'd stand there on a middle stump, and I obviously was trying to get as close to the stumps without hitting him. And there was a couple of deliveries, like as I let him go, he'd dive out the way, but then they'd shape and miss the off stump. So just little things like that, I wanted to kind of have it a batter because maybe some stages, just the stumps on its own doesn't give you that kind of feel. But yeah, I just put myself under a little bit of pressure that I couldn't just slide one in at any stage and hit him.
Do you know, I don't know if Chris will remember this. We played
I know you can say.
Yeah, I just remembered. And we were bowling through, and I think our bowling coach, the wicket was quite green, so you could actually see where you pitched the ball, and we had these little discs. We'd see where you pitched them after each ball. I'd bowled mine, and Chris was nearly done, and I decided to lay probably the wide line, but on a length, and Chris was bowling his last ball. And I think obviously the closer he got, the more his radar decided to focus towards me. Let go of this ball, and I've had to roll out the way, just miss me. So I don't think Chris would have been able to handle someone standing near the stumps. He'd have definitely followed them.
I'd have felt the pressure.
There's times where you used to look at those things. So, for example, you get a surface maybe in the UK or one of the greener ones in South Africa, where after your first 4 or 5 overs, or 6 overs, you might have a drinks break. You go and look down, and you can see where it's kind of pitched. You'd also get them in the subcontinent, but they would just be bare as, and what they'd leave is little white marks from the white ball in particular, where you could see, and you'd be able to judge the kind of length you've hit and how accurate you've been. So yeah, you've got to learn these little things, little visual aids, anything that can help.
This is probably a really silly question. Well, actually, no, I don't think it is a silly question. I mean, I'm curious. Did you look at a spot when you bowled, or did you look at a corridor ahead of you and use the stumps as a reference?
Yeah, there was 2 kinds of things I used to focus on. For me, length was a kind of given, and I think that was all the years. As give me a ball, even now I could probably run up and I'll kind of hit a length, and then you got to just focus on your line. So for me, it was a line. In test matches, you've got that little area that marks out the danger area, that little white, I don't know, marking maybe this far outside of the stumps. I wanted as many balls to go through that area between there and the stump as possible. And then the keeper was vitally important for me. I can remember, I spent a lot of time playing with Mark Boucher after Dave Richardson, and you just get comfortable with where he stands because it kind of lines you up with where you want to get the ball to go through. And then one of the test matches, he was injured and A.B. de Villiers came. And I kind of looked up and go, he's in the wrong place. And I was like, maybe just a little bit more this way, because it was kind of off-putting. He was like more behind the stumps, and that wasn't the line I was looking to hit. So that was for me. I used to focus on line, and then try and line things up with the keeper at certain times, try and get as many balls through to them at particular times in a certain match. But yeah, it was all about line for me. Length, as I say, was kind of given. And I'll tell you what else is, I used to thoroughly enjoy going to play one-day cricket after a test series rather than the other way around, because I just felt in the test series you bowled so many deliveries that your kind of length was ingrained. You didn't have to think too much about your action. You'd put a lot of that base work in, and then you could just adapt things when you went to the one-days. And I felt like I was more accurate and more effective, and probably not going to give away as many bad deliveries coming off a test series, whereas if you went the other way, it wasn't quite the same.
Was your mindset with the new ball in one-day international cricket the same? Just smash top of off, smash a good length?
Yeah, I used to try. I would normally take the first over to give myself an idea about what's happening. Try and see if I'm getting any movement. Try and work out what the right length on the surface is, and then my first 3 or 4 overs invariably in those days would be to try and strike. So you'd have your slips in place, and maybe trying to find the edge, or if there's a certain particular batter, you look to go fuller, maybe hit him LBW, and then if you picked up one, then you continue to go along that line. Whereas if nothing kind of happened in the first 3 or 4 overs and you realized it was pretty flat, then you kind of wanted to build pressure, because you just felt like the batters were starting to feel like they were in, the power play was coming to an end, and they were looking to try and now go at you. Yeah, and often in one-day cricket, because they are looking to attack you, your defensive length or your defensive line is actually quite attacking. Guys in test matches will kind of hang back, look for the right delivery, whereas all of a sudden the mindset in one-day cricket, okay, now I've got to get out in front, and they come with hard hands. So if you just hold that same length, it's often just as effective. So yeah, I think the big thing was the first over, try and gauge what's on the go, what you've maybe got to work with for the day, and then try and be effective. You want to pick up wickets. I mean, wickets up front is what you want to do as a strike bowler. And in my era, there was a lot of the great batters, if you want to refer to them as that, it's who kind of came at the top of the order. A lot of them might bat down the order when it comes to test matches, but in one-day internationals, they came up in the top 2 or 3 batters, and then you wanted to be effective.
Was there did you give yourself any cues at the top of your mark or anything like that when you were in white ball or red ball? Like, for instance, a bit different for myself, I would go off ball throughs before a game. If I was getting the ball to carry through quite nicely and it was shaping, I knew I was in good rhythm, and I feel strong and I feel confident coming into the game. And that's kind of what I relied on. But for yourself, were there anything that you did top of your mark when you were prepping for white ball, or within a game when you're at top of your mark thinking, right, if I need to pump my knees or really use my front arm, was there anything you looked at that helped you get through things?
Yeah, it is funny. I mean, technically wise, there are a few cues, and on a particular day, if you feel like I'm pushing it down leg side, it'll invariably be my head's heading off that way. Maybe I'm closing myself off with the front foot. So then it'll be just a mental note of, as you get into your gather, make sure you don't close yourself off. Stay slightly leaning forward, stay as upright as possible. I didn't like to change too much at the top of my run, so I kind of worked out what delivery I wanted to go with and then try to stick to it. Every once in a while, you've got, I kind of had that mindset, so I'm going to hit this delivery. And the only real change up in those days was batters used to sometimes run at you. And then I would work on that in the pre-game or pre-series of hit length. If the guy runs at you, just try and really hit the length, maybe a meter short, as hard as possible, because I always felt that extra bounce when they're coming at you, you could splice it in and then hit it up. But as I say, they weren't ramping, so we didn't have to think about what am I going to do if he gets down to lap me over fine leg or anything along those lines. But yeah, there was probably 3 or 4 technical things that I was aware of and that I felt comfortable doing in the match. If it was a bit more drastic, I really felt like I was out of form, I'd go and work on that in the nets rather than trying to do it in the match. But I think, a word of advice that I would give to bowlers is you probably feel 100% or really good, maybe 20% of the time, to be brutally honest. And you need to learn the art of being able to do a job even when you're feeling rubbish. There was an interesting podcast, I don't know, it was just a clip that someone sent me. It was the rule of thirds or something. You're going to have a third of your career is going to be great, a third's going to be average, and a third's going to be rubbish. But like when you're having that rubbish, can you still do a job? So I had the art of being able to maybe still bowl 10 overs, 0 for 30 or 1 for 38 when I wasn't feeling great. But I would still keep it tight. I'd be able to hit the length, maybe change the field, and still do that job. Whereas maybe some other people who probably won't ended up being as consistent as I might have been, on a bad day would still try and force the issue and go 1 for 65 or something like that. And that was one of the things that Malcolm taught me. He said, like, even on a flat wicket, don't just give runs away, because you can come back for a second or third spell and all of a sudden things are happening. Maybe the ball's reversing, maybe your rhythm feels a little bit better, and you pick up 2 or 3 wickets and you bowl 15 overs, 3 for 30, rather than going for 40 in the 6 overs that you bowl up front. And then when things feel good, you come back and you've gone 3 for 70 something. So that was just the kind of mindset he taught me, because he was very conscious of also not going for runs, and that kind of fitted into what I had done as a young kid. So when we met and went through that initial part of taking me from a provincial cricket to an international cricketer, that kind of mindset struck home with me.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think at any level, anyone can bowl well on the day, but it's the difference is, you know, how good can your bad days be? If you can look after that, then you end up being known as one of the better bowlers around. So yeah, totally agree with that.
Yeah, the other thing is often when it feels good, that's when you bowl your worst, because you think you go into free flow, you just charge and you think, oh, this feels great, and you end up trying too much or getting too loose. The other thing was also in one day internationals, if I disappeared in the first few deliveries, like if someone got off to a good start, that was something that really kind of focused me. I was like, no, I'm not going to allow it to be one of these days. So there were a couple of triggers that also got my focus up.
Can I ask you some technical questions? Again, I'm going to refer to sort of the masterclasses and things I've seen from yourself on YouTube. You talk about allowing your hip to come through in a few of them. So were you in your early career, did you think you were too side on perhaps and blocked off? Is that where that stemmed from?
Yeah, my dad was pretty strong on that. That was the one thing growing up. He told me, he said, pace comes from your right hip. And if you look at a kind of javelin throw, if you look at the position they get into just before they release that javelin and really launch it, you'll see that right hip comes through. Now, the thing that you've got to understand is that when I was young and you're flexible as a 20-year-old, you get side on and it's easy just to flick that wrist around. And as you get older, your body kind of tightens up. So it was something I was more conscious of at the back end of my career, of really trying to clear that front leg in order to allow the hip to come through, and then obviously get the pace from that and the consistency. Because for me, my bad days were front foot getting too far across, head going that way, kind of heading off towards gully rather than going towards Bouch as a keeper. And if you open that front foot and allow the left hip to give you room for the right hip to come through, you invariably get your rhythm going straight down towards first slip or to the keeper. So it was something I was very conscious of. And I mean, if you want to throw a cricket ball as far as you possibly can, it's a similar kind of process. If you want to throw with as much power, I mean, if you're standing from 5 meters away, 10 meters away, it's easy just to stand and throw it. But if you want to launch one from 100 meters from the boundary, it's the same kind of principle. You kind of get that left leg out the way, hip comes through, and then you let it fire. So I'm a big believer that your pace, a lot of it, comes from the right. And then the second part for me was, that little flick of the wrist at the right time.
Did you find you could take the ball away from the right-hander more from that position too?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so initial part of my career, I used to kind of close myself off and then go over, when I say the outside of it, if that makes sense, the point side of it, I'd go down and then slide the wrist down and push it in. And then as you kind of clear that front leg and you allow the hip to come through, it's easier just to get into your straight lines of your wrist being nasty behind it and then able to tail it away. So definitely helped me with that at the back end.
I think, I mean, I don't know what you think, but that sort of, I don't say old-fashioned, but coaching being side on now, I don't know that it really exists too much. You don't hear now too many coaches instructing bowlers to get really sideways, do you? I don't think.
Yeah, I think if it also goes for particular pace. I think if you're looking to be express, it's a big load on your body if you closed off and now all of a sudden at the last minute you're kind of twisting your torso right around to be able to deliver. And I think when you go down to those manuals, there was often a lot of guys, maybe in the early era of like bowling 125 to 135, where side-on kind of actions were effective. But I think the modern game, where the guys are charging as strong as they are, I personally feel the more open, not to obviously fraying the leg so that it gets past a certain point, which means it puts extra stress, but being able to let that body to come through puts less stress on the back for me, and allows you to bowl with more control and more speed that you can possibly get.
Yeah.
You've played a lot and you've watched a lot of cricket, and this just came to me now actually. Would you say the generation that you played and were involved in, there were quicker bowlers then, or do you think there's quicker bowlers now of what you see?
No, I think we've all had our era where we've had some quick. I mean, you talk of some of the guys that have been around now. I mean, you think of someone like a Dale Steyn or Mitchell Starc or Bumrah. I think they played. I just think that there's probably in those days, you had a bit more time to recover, and there was probably more consistently guys hovering in and dishing up spells of 150 plus. You know, I was fortunate to have the eras where you had your Shoaib Akhtars, you had your Brett Lees, your Alan Donalds, your Wasim and your Wakas. Most teams around the world had someone who was pretty express. I also think the mindset of that era is that did create a fear factor. Whereas now sometimes you come as, I mean, however quick you charge in a T20 or one day international, kind of doesn't matter. You almost disappear as fast as you come. So I don't think it's that in this current era that aura around fast bowlers where the fear factor and you don't fight fire with fire and the kind of just people trying to take evasive action. Now everyone's trying to counterpunch. You know, they're coming up with different ways to be effective against you. So I think the faster bowlers of that era kind of had the ability to dominate more than maybe what they do have now. And also, I mean, it's as a young kid, if you look in there, is there a real drive to become a big quick these days? Whereas in our era, it was kind of test cricket with a bit of one-day cricket thrown in. And you watch these guys charge in and they're dominating world cricket. And, you know, wherever they go, they're really causing a handful. Now with T20s on the go, there's much of the different other kind of cricket. I don't think there's that much of a drive for guys to become out and out express pace bowlers. You know, they're more wanting to learn the art of the different kind of slow balls and how to be effective in the white ball.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
It's actually
a difficult thing. It really is a difficult thing to continually going. I mean, throwing the ball every day to come in and charge in and bowl as quick as you can. It's a tough mindset, and you know, when you're disappearing as well, to come in and day out and try and do it is not easy.
I'm just thinking. Obviously, England have had some quick bowlers, but I think I'd be interested in what your thoughts are. I remember playing and under 11s cricket, and you could. I'm in one day games. I was bowling 16 over spells and everything. Then they brought this ruling of you can only bowl a 4 over spell, and you're limited to bowling so many overs a week. And I think from what they've found research-wise that there's been a lot more stress fractures as the game's gone on. There's a lot of cricket being played now in first-class cricket, and you're trying to get these bowlers through into the international level, but they break down quite a lot through a lot of stress fractures. Whereas I look at your South Africans, a lot of quick bowlers are produced there, and I don't feel like they're maybe a bit more outdoor living and doing a lot more sports than you get over here. Do you think that makes a difference for kids growing up who then go on to play the county cricket or international level?
Yeah, I think the conditioning of playing different sports. So, you know, for us, we would play rugby, we'd play soccer, we'd play hockey, you know, we'd play tennis, whatever it may be. We were outdoors all the time. And that probably does help your body from a core perspective of the different movements, trying to get into different positions and, you know, putting your body under different stress. You know, I do get the understanding of not trying to do too much. I think the big period is when people are going through a growth spurt. I think that's when they really need to be managed. So, you know, if you've got someone who's grown 5 or 10 centimeters in the last 12 months, then you really manage the load there. But I don't think there's any substitute for bowling. So, you know, for us, we also used to have a long pre-season, and it was a gradual build-up of lots of overs in the nets, then starting matches. These international cricketers, you know, if they pick up a niggle, it's difficult to spend 3 or 4 weeks kind of rebooting the system, playing a club game, playing the county game, and then going into the international. They kind of are forced to do their rehab, and then when everyone feels like they're fit and ready, they're thrown back into the cut and thrust of international cricket, and they kind of have to do what they have to do. But yeah, I mean, if I would never have gone away from the amount of bowling we did. I think that was it kind of, you know, if you bowl, you need to bowl to get fit, you need to bowl to get strong. I mean, we didn't focus massively on our cores at that stage. You know, Malcolm was pretty good on that as well. He talked about the back, the stomach, and we started to do a lot more of strengthening exercises, but it wasn't a massive thing, or as big a thing as it is now. So Yeah, I do think the art of also playing the other sports, even from just a preparation perspective, mental preparation as much as physical. The more sports you play, I see kids focusing far too early for me, when they're like 12 or 13, and that's it. I'm only playing cricket. I think you need to enjoy other aspects of sport first, and also, you might be an unbelievable gun cricketer, and you're always the rock star, and if that's all you're exposed to from 12 on, your mindset's difficult to deal with any failure that you might experience. Whereas if you play in a soccer team and you may be the 10th best player, or you play rugby and you're the 5th best player, you learn, I'm part of the team and I've still got to do a bit of a job, and I'm not going to be the rock star, but there's a part I can play, a contribution I can make, and it allows you to have an understanding for what's required. So yeah, I would also suggest that kids play as many sports as they can up until 16, maybe even 18, and then really focus on what they want to do.
You summed up Keith's football career pretty well then. 10th best at Blackburn.
There's no comeback to that. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, sorry, that was an easy one. You teed me up for that, Shaun.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. Before, we've kept you for nearly an hour now. Before we wrap things up, can we just ask you, like, what bowlers on the circuit at the moment do you really like, and who do you think's, you know what I mean? If you were advising anyone to copy someone now, who would it be?
Yeah, I mean, talking about that, if I just do my career all over again, I wouldn't have done my action. That was funny enough. I thought my delivery stride was far too long. I would have definitely tried to shorten it down. I think there's some exciting ones I really enjoy. I mean, I enjoy a lot of the Australians. I think the three of them are very good. I think in any era they would have dominated the way they have. They've got a nice blend of real gas and shape with Stark, and then consistency and pace with Cummins and Hazelwood. As South Africans, we've been blessed with lots of fast bowlers. I mean, obviously Dale Steyn's now given it away, but for example, Nortje and Rabada are brilliant. I enjoy what they bring. Nandre Berger, the left arm who's just come in, I'm excited about what he could achieve. Bumrah from India, Shamis have been fantastic. The Pakistanis, I can't even keep up. Every second time I look around, there's someone else coming in bowling 150 kilometers. So yeah, I think, obviously, as Mark Wood's been great for England, Jimmy Anderson, what he's done has been fantastic. I suppose the real disappointment in this current era for me would probably be the West Indians. To have watched for those so many years of them dominating with their big quicks and really putting the fear of fire and brimstone into most teams around the world, to kind of look now and it's, you've got a couple of guys who pop in here and there, but to not have them as a real force is probably the only disappointment. But I think there's some really good bowlers, and I think some of the skills that they possess these days as well, the ability to adjust from T20 to one-day internationals and then to Test cricket is pretty exceptional. So yeah, there's some really good ones around. I mean, I love the era I played in, just because of the nature of some of the players. Your Waka Wasim, your Ambrose and Welsh, and McGrath and Lee and Gillespie. Wherever you went, Javagal Srinath was fantastic at that time. You guys had Darren Goff, who was a bit of fire and brimstone, trying to get that speed gun up as high as he could. But they've also had some wonderful spinners at that stage. So yeah, I think your eras are positive from different points of view as you've gone through. I enjoyed what I had then and who we played against, but I enjoy some of the stuff I see, and as I say, particularly the skills that they've invented and developed.
Yeah, I think the last West Indian that should have been, if they did, I don't know what they did wrong, I don't know what messed up, something went wrong there, was Jofra Archer, obviously, but he ended up more in the kit for England. So yeah, they have had a few, but they don't seem to. Well, they seem to have gone out of the game pretty quickly, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, it was even at the end of my career when we went there. I mean, I think their surfaces got a little bit flat as well. I mean, they were having spinners into the attack in like the 10th over of a 4-day match. You're like, what? The old days, they used to have like 4 quicks in each Caribbean team, whether it was Barbados or Jamaica or wherever it was. You had these guys charging and trying to knock your head off. So I think that's been said. That's changed a little bit. But in saying that, Joffre was a real exciting talent. I hope he somehow gets it right again, even if it's for a year or two, just to see what he can possibly do. And therein lies the frustration. Therein is the real challenge of fast bowling. You might have the ability, you might have the action, you might have certain things to go with, but for your body to stay fit the whole time, to have the mindset of charging in every time, the expectation of every time you throw him the ball, come on, we want to see 140, and if he doesn't, you're like, oh, what's wrong with you? It's a difficult gig.
Yeah, I agree. He came in for a bit of stick actually in the last Test series he played, where he kind of got what you've just said there. He kind of got accused of almost just bowling within himself and stuff. And when you're like, yeah, well, maybe he is. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's tough.
But I think also what happens is, and people don't really understand it, is I think they put a lot of pressure on young guys when they first come in, and the expectation. You think of a 21-year-old who launches in. I mean, there's people, you talk to businessmen, they've got their kids at 21. They're stuck at varsity, they're living the life. They're in their third years of studying. Every night they're going out and have a party, and it's footloose and fancy free. But as a sportsman, all of a sudden, if you're 21 and you've got the ability, then we have an expectation of what you're supposed to be able to do. And often those kind of sports people mentally aren't mature enough to be able to deal with the consistent requirement of what they have to produce on a daily basis. And you've got to give them a bit of leeway for 3 or 4 years to say, you know what, 75% of the time we're going to get what we want, but there's going to be 25% as a young kid that you're just not going to live up to it. Your experience, your maturity, you get married, you have kids, you start to experience the world from a real perspective rather than a sheltered environment. That's when you kind of mature and come into your own and start to produce a little bit more. But I think we put a little bit too much on some of the young guys. They're basically 19, 20. They don't really know life much outside of the game. They've been to an academy, and then it's fame, fortune, everything gets thrown at them, and it's a difficult thing to deal with. So, yeah, I think people should kind of just give them a bit of leeway. But as you say, as people who watch sport, I mean, I'm a soccer fan, rugby fan, golf fan. When you've seen a guy and he's kind of sets a little bit of standard, or you can see what he can possibly do, every time you turn on the TV, you want to see that same level, and it's not that easy to do.
No, for sure.
I agree. Chris was the same. In his little local village, he was the big gun at 16. Very quickly, but he settled down once.
Fish in a small pond. Is that what you're saying?
He's just trying to get some revenge for my football comment. That's all.
Did you play for Blackburn?
Yeah, no, we don't. If I was there now, I'd have probably stood a chance. They're not anymore. I was there when they were a decent team.
Well, they've won as many Premier Leagues as Liverpool, haven't they?
Yeah, they have.
That's a good point. Forget that.
Yeah.
Just the one. Maybe 2 this season. I don't want to upset any Liverpool fans.
Yeah, there's plenty of them, to be fair, at the minute. Frustrating. Keith, do you have any more questions for Shaun?
I've got one more. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. It's been amazing. I wish, it'd be great to have another chat at some point. I feel like we've just skimmed the surface with what you know on bowling and cricket in general. But no, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Well, good.
Yeah, appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Right. I will play the outro song, which I tend to get wrong, so bear with me. Thanks very much, Shaun. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Cool. Nice to chat, guys. Well.